Hi there, welcome to another episode of the Bonsai Stuff podcast. Your host for this podcast is me, Scott Martin from Bonsai Matsu, and thank you very much for listening in. You may or may not be aware, but for about the last 8 weeks, I've been on the road, Bonsai Roadshow, travelling to across this great country of Australia, from one side across to the other, to do a lot of work, a lot of bonsai stuff with a lot of people in Western Australia, which has been awesome. It's been so good. I talked about it last week, but it was such an incredible experience for me, life-changing, I suppose, in my bonsai life, and just it just gives you a real buzz when you see so many people that are so focused and so similar in their love and appreciation for bonsai, no matter where they are. I knew that already. I'd already been across to Western Australia before, but it's just really nice to meet so many more people in that sort of an environment where you're doing lots of workshops and all that sort of stuff, and it was really cool. I think there's a lot of bonsai love around the globe, and it's a really good thing. It's really nice. Anyway, so you might also notice that for our last batch of podcasts, they've sounded just a little bit different, and I apologise, but I am 110% committed to this podcast, and as a result, a lot of the time I've been away, I've been podcasting on the road. So I'll have a bit of a yak about that, and I'll share a few funny little stories with you. Also, in this episode of the podcast, I want to talk about fungal issues, because now is about the time that I start to see them. I start to get notified of them, and it's more a matter of, I suppose, what steps you should take initially to try and minimize any potential long-term effects with these nasty fungal issues, as well as a few things that I focus on, just good housekeeping, I suppose, to try and prevent them in the first place. And also, having getting to the end of our spring season, heading towards summer, especially down in Melbourne, but also other places around the country too. There's certainly these high temperature spikes which are coming, and everything seems to be getting a little bit more dramatic, a little bit more serious as the years go on with this climate change. So, just a few things to chat about what we can do to try and prevent that, or help our bonsai get through those periods. So, anyway, strap yourself in. Let's get into it. Before we get into the serious discussion on fungal issues, let's have a talk about podcasting on the road. So normally my setup is quite good. Spent a lot of money a long time ago on some proper podcasting equipment, good microphone, good studio setup, into a great computer, so I can do the editing and make everything run smoothly. And this road trip has been on the cards for a long time, so I've had a lot of time to plan and prepare. And if you know me at all, you know that I love to be prepared. I don't like to get caught by surprise. And to be honest with you, the thought of not doing the podcast was never entered into, because it's too important. It's really got momentum now. It means a lot to a lot of people, and in turn, it means a lot to me. So I wanted to make sure that I could keep that flowing and keep it relevant and keep it interesting, but not take too much of a hit when it comes to the quality, because that's one thing I've really worked on a lot, is trying to improve the quality, or the sound quality, of the podcast. So as I said before, I do apologise if these are a bit tinny, but you'd be surprised to know that when I've travelled, I've gone with a camper van. So that's like a motorhome on wheels, and it's got its own kitchen and bed, and it's nice and squishy, nice and cozy for two of us, but it's not conducive to being a sound studio, somewhere where you can record things nicely. So I, at the moment, am sitting inside the camper van recording this on a little fold-up table. I've got my portable little mic that I use when I record YouTube videos strapped, or actually elastic band around something to hold it near my face. I've got my laptop in front of me recording this live into my podcast recording equipment, my program. so I can keep this flowing. But I can tell you that there's been times where I've had to record the podcast in an ensuite. So when you go to a caravan park, sometimes you can order an ensuite site, which is its own private toilet and shower. So I'll do it in there. I'll go in there. Another time, went into we were staying in Perth, and we booked a hotel to go and stay in the city and do a bit of sightseeing, walk around the botanical gardens, and have a look at all the beautiful plants that are floating around the area. And so we get to the hotel room. Okay, look, can you just give me about half an hour to record a podcast by myself? Can you go for a walk? So I've taken every opportunity at trying to spread out and make sure that I've had a bit of silence, bit of alone time to record the podcast for you guys, and it's all in all has worked. There has been times where the people with lawnmowers, or there was one time at this hotel when, I don't know if you heard, I don't think you did because I listened pretty hard for it, but there was some construction work happening next door where they were demolishing part of a wall, and there was just this constant thud like a metronome beside the room. But anyway, soldiered on, got through that. I've had lawnmowers going past the camper van. Seriously, I've had everything. But the main thing is, and the important part is that there's been that continuity and that momentum, and it's kept the podcast flowing. And I really, honest to God, appreciate you sticking with me. I haven't had any nasty comments about it, so it feels like I've sort of got away with it. So I'm fessing up now that it probably it's going to go back to normal. Next podcast you hear is going to be recorded on the proper equipment, and it should sound a hell of a lot better. Should be a hell of a lot more comfortable for me, and we can keep this party rolling. But anyway, let's move on. Let's move on to treating fungal issues. Now, fungal issues in trees are pretty serious. And I don't mean to be alarmist about it, but they are. They once I find that your tree develops a fungal issue, it's a long road. It's a long path to recovery, if at all, because sometimes, depending on what type of fungal issue it is, it can have no current treatment plan for it. So anyway, let's just talk about what, I suppose, where fungal issues come from for starters. I want to talk about trying to identify them. So when you look at your trees, it might sort of spark something in the back of your head when you do look at them and you think something's not right. I'll talk about a treatment plan or a process that I go through with my bonsai, or any bonsai that come to me that I believe has got a fungal issue. And then, most importantly, I'll talk about preventative measures, or things that I do to try and give the trees the best chance possible to prevent them from getting fungal issues. So where do they come from? Normally fungal spores are airborne. So there's often very little that you can do to prevent your bonsai from getting them. So if I'm just trying to make it, I suppose, don't feel guilty. There are things that we can do as to how we look after our trees and where we position them, and how we can give them the best defense as possible. But the fungal spores themselves will come in and out of your garden, and you've got no control over it. Might be from your neighbours, could be from a long way away. It could be from park garden trees that are affected, but they can also come from insects. They can carry the fungal spores in on their backs or on their legs, and there's not much you can do about it. So it can come from your trees become more susceptible to fungal issues when they're stressed. So the environment that we keep our trees in, which is what we'll work towards later on, is really, really important to avoid that stress, that weakening of the tree's defences. And another thing that isn't really talked about heavily is that the fungal issues can come from contaminated soil. So the soil that we use for our bonsai is super important, really, really important. And it's something, reusing soils and stuff like that is not something that I tend to talk about. I know it's heavily practiced. It's not something that I do, and the good reason for it is that if the soil's contaminated, then you're stuffed. Like, there's nothing you can do about it. Once it's in the soil, if you take it from one tree to the next unknowingly, then you spread that issue, that fungal issue, and your trees have really got no way of bouncing back from that. So they're the main causes. So insects, airborne, contamination of it could be on your tools as well, working from one tree that's affected to the next. So a lot of these things could be prevented in the first place with good management of your bonsai practices. So anyway, so identifying fungal issues, invariably it comes from the foliage. That's where you'll see. That's where I come across it almost all the time. It might be oh, I don't know what's wrong with my bonsai, but the foliage looks a little dull. And dulling of color is a really important one. You might look at your tree and you've got to be careful it's not another issue and jump the gun and straight away head down the path of a fungal issue. But like let's say it's lack of water for a period of time or something like that. But generally, in my experience, when I look at foliage and it appears to be it's a dull color. It goes, instead of a vibrant green, you look at it and it's sort of very lackluster and there's no spark there. It looks like it's sort of fading to nothing or going that dull olive color. And you might find that they start going yellow in blotches, or they start going brown in different areas. They're all triggers, I suppose, that you've got a fungal issue of some kind. But it's more the feel of the tree, that flat feeling, the dull feeling. You look at it and go, it just doesn't look right. It's lost its vigor overnight, or it just appears to be getting worse. And that new foliage that was shooting up is suddenly not quite so vertical or so lifelike. It sort of starts to dull down. And when it's a watering issue and you get those transpiration problems, the first place that gets affected, where you have a hot day and you get that burning of the leaves or burning of the foliage, it's at the furthest point. So if you look at your foliage, there's no leaf burn on it. It's not really a transpiration issue, but it's starting to wilt. That's a real dangerous signal that something's starting to go wrong with your tree. Wilting for no reason is it sends a shiver up my spine, because it's probably the worst thing that I've found with my trees that I've experienced. And that wilt is something which is bloody hard, if at all possible, to treat. So you just need to be careful. Like I said, don't jump the gun that it's a watering issue. Be aware and in tune with the tree as to what to expect when you walk out there and look at it. And this daily monitoring, once, twice, 3 times, as many times as you can, spending with your trees. You'll get to know them. You'll get to experience what they're like, but you'll also get to know when something's not right. It's like having a pet or a kid or something. You're sort of in tune with them, and you can tell when something's not right, because their normal behavior or their normal growing habit or their appearance when it comes to trees changes. And it might be an area isolated thing. It could be just on the new foliage for starters. It can look like it's the whole tree. The degree of it varies. So that's basically where they come from and how to identify them. So let me have a sip of coffee, and then I'll talk to you about how I think that we should treat them. As I said before, treatment of fungal issues is a long, slow process. It's not extremely rewarding, and often, again, I don't like to sound alarmist, but I've found that from my experience with my trees, when I do get a fungal issue, often it's very hard to stop. It's really hard to stop, which is why this preventative section that I'm going to talk about next becomes so important, because the treatments, you go through the process, you activate your recovery plans, you do everything you possibly can, and sometimes it just delays things or it slows things down, and it just becomes something that's heartbreaking, to be honest. And it's not my favourite thing in the world to talk about, to be honest, because it generally tends to head a certain way, and it's never good. So the first thing that I look to do is remove the damaged area. Okay, so if you're looking at leaves that are affected, that clearly you've got a second opinion on it, and you think it's a fungal issue, or you're leaning that way to say, hey, look, this is starting to look not right. Not sure why. Let's say it is a transpiration issue, right? Let's say it is a hot day, it's lack of water. Fantastic. It's not the end of the world. So the treatment for that would be exactly the same thing. I would look to remove those damaged leaves. So if you're looking at a leaf, it's started to curl up a little bit, it's started to go a funny color. It's, you're not looking at removing every single leaf on the tree. It's just maybe one area or just the tips or something like that. First thing you do, remove the foliage. If in doubt, just get it out of there. Make sure that you apply some really good practices and don't have it sitting around other trees, that foliage that you've removed. And it's actually a really good area, a good idea to isolate into an independent area the tree that you think's affected. If there is a fungal issue, you don't want it spreading. You don't want it developing and taking over your trees completely. So I'd isolate the tree into a completely separate area. I would start by removing the damaged foliage. If it looks like it's spreading, like it's going down the branches, down the structure, then try and remove it before it gets too far. Often, I say often because it's not that often. When I do come across it, I've found that the branches will start to go a dark color instead of being a woody color, green or brown or grey or whatever they're going to be. They start tending to be more of a black color. Once you see that starting to happen, the idea is I'd recommend that you follow that down the branches, get to a point where it's nice and clean and cut it off. And I know it might be hard. It might be a really ramified area of the tree. It can be an area that looks fantastic, but getting rid of it sooner rather than later will help minimize the spread. It may not necessarily stop it. It may, but it may not. So I always look to cut that affected foliage and structure off as quickly as I come across it. Don't hesitate. Don't leave it for a day. Reach out if you need to a local nurseryman or me or one of your bonsai network and say, hey guys, what do you reckon? Yeah, do you think it's fungal or what is it? If you find that you're feeling that something's not right, removing it ASAP gives your tree the best chance to prevent it spreading into the rest of the structure. It may already be there, but it's not going to hurt anymore by getting rid of it as soon as you possibly can. And like I said, work your way back along the structure to try and find a point where it's nice and clean and remove it to that point. Then I'd apply cut paste around that area. I would make sure that you're keeping water away from the foliage as well. Make sure that you're only watering the tree when it needs to be watered. Don't keep it in a soggy wet mess, because the fungal issue may be in the roots and spreading up through the tree structure. The next thing I do is, if you're in a fertilizing period, as we are now, remove the fertilizer. Take the stress off the tree. Once a tree starts to struggle with an issue, starts to go backwards, then fertilizing really isn't your best friend. It's not going to build the tree's strength up yet. You need the tree to look at compounding its resources into whatever area needs the work. And then once the system gets up and going again, then you reintroduce the fertilizer. But first step I'd do is take it off. The other thing I'd look to do too is, just in case it is something like maybe fertilizer burn as opposed to a fungal issue, which may or may not be the case, I would then at that stage thoroughly water the tree. Like, water it, have the water flushing through, let it sit for 5 minutes, come back, water it again, flush the water through, come back, give it 5 minutes, do it again. And do that, as many times as you possibly can within that sort of half-hour period, just to make sure that if there is something in the soil that's causing the fertilizer burn, you don't want to be distracted by that. Flush it out of the tree system as quickly as you possibly can, and then just leave it, and then get onto the moisture meter, or just make sure that you're monitoring the tree's water uptake, and only give the tree water as it needs it. The next part that I would do to treat any kind of suspected or actual fungal issue is a round of fungal sprays, fungicides. And this will vary obviously based on where you are and what sort of issue it is. But there's things like your copper sprays that seem to work pretty well. That tends to protect the buds that are going to be coming out and reshooting. Other things like Mancozeb, there's Mancozeb Plus now as well within our market in Australia that's available. But basically, I would head to the local nursery or hardware store or wherever sells these fungicides, and just have a read through as to what the issues are that the different treatments offer you. There are natural alternatives, which I'm sure you can find anywhere on the internet. Hand on heart, I wouldn't waste my time with them. If it's serious enough that you're contemplating using a fungicide, then you want to make sure that you're going to be effective with what you do. That's always my recommendation with your trees, no matter what you're looking to treat, whether it's a pest issue, a fungal issue, whatever it is. Your tree's got to take number one priority. Has to, always should, always will, for me. So I look to work my way through a range of different treatments. Only use them to the strength recommendations on the packet. Don't try and think that you're going to outsmart the manufacturer or the fungus by changing it or upping it or downing it or whatever it is. Just use it exactly as per the instructions on the packet. It's always safest, always best to do that. And as I said before, I'd isolate it. The only thing would be with my treatment, my sprays, I'd be pretty thorough with the saturation when I did it, and I'd be setting a reminder to make sure that I followed up for the next spray on that as well, to make sure that you're definitely doing the best that you possibly can. As I said, it takes a bloody long time for these things to take hold and start to do their job. So it's a matter of being patient with it and making sure that your tree's in the best possible position, and that you're okay with it too, because it can be, it's a long road. It's a heartbreaking road most times, and often by the time you identify it and see it on one branch, it's unfortunately not going to be the only branch that's been affected. So you need to make sure that you're treating them as thoroughly as you possibly can. But it's that removal, isolate, spray, repeat the process, flush the root system, and make sure that your husbandry, how you're looking after that tree from now on, by removing the fertilizer and only watering the tree when it needs it, to make sure that it's given its best possible scenario to try and recover. All right, so that wraps that section up. Let's have a talk about how I'd suggest that we look at preventing. Okay, so prevention might not be possible. All we can do is do our best, and that applies not just to fungal issues, but every single second of your care for your bonsai. Just do the best we possibly can. It means providing the best possible environment that you can within your limitations for your trees. If you do that, then that includes things like the position that they're in. I love an open spot. I love them to get as much airflow as they possibly can. I position them around my yard where there's that constant air movement. If it's often, I find that when we start talking about fungal issues in a tree that's maybe affected, I start talking about where the tree's kept in the yard, and often it's maybe under another tree, or it's in a corner of a yard, or it's on a balcony, or it's on a deck, or it's sheltered away in this little spot where when you think about it, going back to the first part we talked about, is these fungal spores are airborne. So when your tree's in a pretty sheltered spot and that wind comes in there, maybe brings in the fungal spores, but the wind's not there to pick up those fungal spores and keep them moving on, then it's a perfect environment for these fungal spores to take hold and do damage to your bonsai or settle in. Really make sure they're part of the tree's system for the next little bit of its life, which is pretty disastrous for us bonsai lovers. So the environment that we keep our trees in has got a massive part to play with fungal issues. So trying to prevent them by putting them into a really open spot. Look around the yard for other affected trees too. Like might be garden trees that you've got that are notorious for these things. Powdery mildew comes at the end of the vegetable growing season on my zucchinis. So what do? As soon as I've got my harvest, before the leaves start to get too old and I know that powdery mildew is going to become an issue, I rip everything out, make sure that it's well and truly gone before it starts to cause an issue. Might mean I miss out on a few extra zucchinis along the way, but it also means that I don't have to worry about that as an issue with my trees. So you want to create the perfect environment for the trees through their positioning. Lots of sunlight, lots of air movement, exposure to the elements. Let that rain belt down on them. Let the wind come through. Make sure they're secured and they're safe and they're not going to have branches falling down on them or anything like that. But you want to make sure that they're in the best possible place to avoid these fungal spores coming in and taking hold. The second is make sure that you're visible with your trees or as much as you possibly can be. I talked about ants. Ants coming in to feed on other bugs, bringing with them sooty mold. It's a preventable issue that if you can get rid of what the ants are feeding on, then you don't have an issue with ants because they won't just come to your tree to have a walk around the branches and bring sooty mold with them. So you can avoid a lot of these things by being in tune with your trees and stopping them from happening in the first place. The next thing is your tree health. Tree health comes from so many different factors. Like it's not just going to be one thing that you're going to focus on. It's repotting frequency. It's making sure that you're securing your tree in the pot after you've repotted it. It's making sure that you've avoided the tree being exposed to the elements for a period of time after repotting so it can recover. It's a matter of reintroducing it to its environment in a gentle fashion so transpiration doesn't cause issues to the tree and therefore damage the tree's structure. It's a matter of making sure during the growing periods you're fertilizing appropriately. Not too much, not too little, but the just right, the Goldilocks approach with fertilizing your trees, making sure that fertilizer is replenished, making sure that your watering is perfect or as perfect as you can possibly make it so your tree doesn't go wanting for anything. It's making sure that your pruning practices, that your scissors are sharp, your branch cutters are sharp. So when you make a cut on the tree, the wounds heal as efficiently as they possibly can. It's a matter of making sure you don't have debris sitting around the pots. It's making sure there's you know what I mean. There's a million things that come into play when we have bonsai. That we know what we have to do. We know what we should do. Do we do it all the time? No, we probably don't. You should though. And it's those little things, those 1%ers or those practices that we should hold ourselves to account for that make such a big difference when it comes to your tree health. It might seem nothing at the time to clean your scissors before you start pruning a tree, but it makes a big difference, especially if you've got a tree that you've been working on that maybe you get a bit of a feel that something's not quite right on it. Easy, just disinfect your scissors before you move on to another tree. Takes 2 seconds. Bit of isopropyl alcohol to dip your scissors in and move on. It's like going to the hairdressers and finding that the hairdressers hasn't cleaned the scissors from one person to the next. It sort of gives you that horrible feeling up in the back of your head. So with your trees, it takes nothing to make sure that you do these practices, which may not seem like much, but they can make a massive difference to this tree that's in your custody that lives inside a pot that we want to live for a million years. So that makes a big difference. And the last thing I'm going to talk about with preventing these fungal issues, because I mean there's about 4 million things there that we need to all focus on to make sure that we're doing the best we possibly can be. Not easy, I know, but we have to. The last thing I want to talk about is reusing your soil. Now, it's a common practice, especially when you're growing stock out, that you'll sieve the soil, you'll reuse it. It might look like it's intact. That's great. I used to do it myself. Used to do it. Used to being the operative word. I don't do it anymore because for the cost of new bonsai soil for me compared to what potentially I could be passing on to whatever it is that I'm using that soil on, it's just not worth it. It's not worth the risk. I don't reuse my soil. I don't recommend people reuse it. I understand people do. I don't have a problem with it other than it just exposes your tree, no matter how old it is, to something. And I've said this before on the podcast, but it doesn't really matter to me if it's a fresh little seed that I'm putting in the dirt or it's a 1,000-year-old tree. They're all just as important. And that root structure, that root growth, it stems or it creates the health of the tree or the strength of the tree. So to compromise on that part of the tree, it's definitely not where I'd start. If I was going to compromise on something, anything, not that I would, but if I was, I'm racking my brain now thinking on the fly, but it would be the pot. Put in a plastic pot for longer. Don't go and buy an expensive Japanese pot and then use, or a custom made Australian potter's pot, or any pot for that matter from anywhere around the world. Don't go and spend money on a pot if you're looking to save money on the soil that's being used. And I know there's environmental, you're recycling, I get it, that's cool, but I'd recycle it into my veggie garden or somewhere else around the yard. I don't recycle it on my bonsai. I think that, as I said, for the very small cost of what soil is for a tree, the potential for that really damaging impact is enormous. So I do try and make sure that it's not something that I compromise on, to be honest. Well, folks, that brings the traveling podcasting of bonsai stuff to an end. Thank you for sticking around. Thank you for your patience. Thank you for your loyalty and your support. It's really nice. It's really, really cool. In a crazy world, it's nice to know that we've all got this consistent measure of our bonsai to keep us warm at night. And while talking about warm too, I want to just say that when we get these warm spikes in temperature, especially when you've got delicate fresh foliage, you've got to be really careful. It's something that if you haven't done now, I'd be looking to prune off a lot of new growth, bar sacrifice branches, just so your foliage starts to get to harden off. Be careful if you have defoliated, as we talked about a little while ago, that you may have some new growth coming along as well. Might be worthwhile putting them into a shade cloth environment just temporarily, and just really keep an eye on it. Make sure that things are watered well before the hot spike comes. Look at keeping the environment cool for the tree. That's about really all you can do. But if you focus on the tree's strength, if you've built up the root system through good fertilization and repotting, then you should be okay. Don't stress too much about it. But these warm spikes and fresh foliage can be a bit of a nightmare because they haven't formed that waxy coating yet to protect themselves. So just be mindful that it may do a bit of damage burning the leaf. It may have nothing at all to do with transpiration. It may just be that the foliage is just so delicate and fine that it just needs a little bit of extra protection. So for me, it's a matter of putting things under shade cloth and making sure that they've got the best chance they possibly can to get through the warm period. As I said, thank you for sticking around. Your loyalty through the subscribers is brilliant. I love you all. I really appreciate it. Hope you've enjoyed the traveling podcast. I hope they've kept you going through the period I've been away for 8 weeks. And like I said, I'm back to normal next week, which I can't wait. Can't wait to give my trees a bit of a cuddle and and tell them a few stories about my trip. Plus, I've got another 3 that I've picked up along the way that are now joining the Bonsai Matsu collection. That'll be very special trees in the future, but more of those to come through social media somewhere down the track. Love you all. Thanks for sticking around. Happy bonsai.